Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast featuring real conversations with conscious objectors to the status quo. I'm your host, Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
On today's episode, we have therapist Karla Scherf. Join us for a conversation all about having patience for larger systematic change. Together, we talk about the balance between activism and self-care, having faith in the unfolding process, and following your passion. Karla met me in this conversation at a time of feeling a lot of burnout. I had just started having therapy clients and feeling the weight of that work and hearing about the large amounts of trauma that exist out in the world and the pain that exists out in the world. And even if you're not a therapist, right, the pain that we see on the news, the pain that we see on social media, and it just felt like, my God, no matter where I look, there is a fire that I can be stressed out about. And then on top of that, as someone with privilege, right, I'm always trying to deconstruct the ways in which that has blinded me to how I'm throwing out microaggressions or other sort of unaware biases that I have in my own privilege. And so then it's on top of all the fires, I need to be doing this work, I need to be serving people, I need to be reading more, I need to be doing this, right? You can feel it in my voice here, this rising of I need to be doing more and more and more, and there is never enough that I can do to actually change the whole system. And I've heard a lot of friends feel this way in activism and social justice spaces, this feeling of constantly needing to do work and constantly needing to grow and to serve. And at the same time, that's how we can hit that wall of burnout. And that's why I so deeply appreciated Karla coming on to the show and meeting me where I was at in this conversation and helping to invite all of us to have a wider perspective on the systematic change that we are hoping to bring about. And yeah, to remember that the first person who started the mural might not see the end of that full painting, but their role was crucial, right? And all of the people that have stood before us to get us to the space of liberation that we're in right now, they're not seeing how far we're going to keep going. And the same for us, right? We're in this space wanting more change, wanting more revolution, and also knowing that that will probably happen beyond our lifetime, and being able to sit with that and honor that. And in our time here, the need for us to have self-care and community care for one another, right? Holding one another in the work that we do, and remembering that the fires that are going on outside are out of our control in many ways. But one of the main things that is within our control is our ability to be present with others, our work, and ourselves, right? That alone is power and will slowly over time create this larger systematic change we are all dreaming of, being able to be present with one another. So whatever it is that you need to have that, Howard Thurman reminds us in one of those famous quotes, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. Y'all, I want to invite all of you, myself included, to focus on the things that are within our control. How can I show up for my community today? How can I show up for myself with self-care today? And how can I follow the things that I am passionate about that bring me alive? Because that's what we all need to be doing, our small little corners of passion work, and that alone will change the world. We don't have to do the whole thing. We can trust that there are other people out there doing this work, and together we're going to bring about the change that we're all longing for. And again, that might be beyond our lifetime. That might be for future generations, but we're doing the work. We're showing up each day, and it's conversations like this that are hopefully going to inspire all of us to put our mask on first and then keep fighting the good fight. Y'all, enjoy today's episode and tune in. Well, then I like to ask first, how would you introduce yourself?
My name is Karla. I'm she, her. I'm a licensed clinical therapist over at Best Therapies.
Great. And I know we were talking a little bit about the different type of clients that you work with. Could you give me more of that story of what populations you're passionate about working with?
Yeah, absolutely. I had originally started, well, actually started a group home for kids many years ago, but I started really figuring out my journey when I was at Alexian Brothers Behavioral Health Hospital, and I would float to all these different floors. And what I realized is there were certain populations I gravitated towards.
Mhm.
I spent a lot of hours working on the eating disorder floor, both inpatient and outpatient, adolescent. I realized working with adolescent families, obviously within a lot of, no matter where you go, you run into a lot of LGBTQ.
Mm.
And I just eventually realized that I really enjoy this identity work. Even if it's under these different frameworks, that I really enjoy working with different people, being able to, it's kind of the secret to life, right? Figuring out what what's my right path and what's right for me, even if it's not, like we just said, what the neighbors are doing next door, and being able to figure out what's right for me and go through that path, and then letting it evolve and change again. Yeah, so I gravitated to the populations that work could really
Mm.
happen with.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Could you say more then about how identity is connected to eating disorders and eating disorder recovery?
Oh yeah, absolutely. A lot of times, when we go into, it's funny because you'd be surprised how much it manifests in different ways. So it might be somebody who was in wrestling and was told, "Hey, you have to be under this weight. You have to be over this weight." It may be that adolescent who's trying to figure themselves out, and if I'm trying to fit some identity that is idealized that I saw in a magazine, and it may be sitting and working with a 30-year-old individual who was assigned male at birth and realizing, like, hey, unless I starve myself, I will never fit that frame of a female, which is my true identity, right?
Mhm.
Especially if I was born with broad shoulders. So I can't put it into one little box, but at the end of the day, when we're looking at eating disorders, what we can do is we can, of course, we're doing the, hey, let's start to figure out what's physical, emotional, different forms of eating. How do I replace anxieties and different feelings so we can replace the food? But half of the work that we're doing is actually working on, what would your identity be if you didn't need this to be able to grasp
Mm.
control of that? What would it look like? Seeing people really evolve and butterfly and turn into their true selves. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think some of the pieces I was thinking about as you were speaking were that a lot of eating disorders, it always is this, I don't know, this sort of conceptualization that this only happens to people who are assigned female at birth. And
No,
that's kind of the
not at
narrative
all.
around
Yep.
it. So I appreciated that you kind of mentioned different ways that this shows up. Could you kind of speak to that?
Yeah, and like I said, it kind of can start at the school age level because there's different pressures, especially in sports in different areas to fit a different norm. But I think that we're seeing I'm not that old, but when I first came out, it was very female dominated. And I don't think it's because there was a lack of other genders, but at the time you didn't see social workers walking around with a clipboard that had a rainbow on it. There were no clubs. There was no, like, hey, it's safe to talk about this stuff. And if you look nowadays, we're opening up more and more that, like, hey, it's okay to be who you are. And if that's not who you were assigned at birth, do that walk, right? And
Mhm.
you're going to be accepted. And with that outcomes people being able to be more open about these battles. So I truly believe that even that when I first started, the battles were going on, but we weren't necessarily seeking the help or getting those things. We were kind of sitting in dysphoria and living our life. In fact, I've worked with quite a few older individuals who said, hey, I did the thing because it's what I was supposed to do, the traditional marriage, the traditional thing. I act as the active husband throughout this life. But now that my wife has passed, I finally feel free to just, like, openly admit I'm not a male, right? And I'm
Wow.
sitting in dysphoria for the last 30 years. Let's
Wow.
talk about it. How would I even start that journey at this age? And so we get to talk about it, and they get to slowly, and a lot of it's trial and error, and find what's right for them. It can be a really exciting journey, but it
Yeah.
is a journey of working through dysphoria in different ways. A lot of
Mm.
times when we are dealing with that form of, the eating disorder is actually a byproduct of, as opposed to somebody who might come to me, literally it's strictly this eating disorder because it's what's been ingrained by my parents, the coach, so on and so forth.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. Right. And how that can go outside of not just restriction in terms of eating or those sort of like typical ideas of maybe what an eating disorder is. And also maybe there's some discussion about body dysmorphia. How do you feel about that sort of language? I mean, I don't like any of this like pathological language that we use to describe
Mm,
these things that are systemic because of, you know, the expectations of what it means to be in these bodies that are quite literally not normal in my opinion, right? Of like the stick thin figure or this other thing, this sort
yeah,
of you know, the Barbie aesthetic that is quite literally not proportional to real humans, you know, sometimes. And so I don't like pathologizing any of it, but yeah, I think there's also been some space created with the idea of body dysmorphia as a another way to understand the struggle that this can be when you feel like your body doesn't fit and you're not necessarily restricting food. Maybe you're working out really compulsively to like get into
mhm.
this. Yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I love that you say that because I tell all my clients, hey, this is going to go off, but I promise I have a point to bring it back on.
Yeah,
I will tell them that every single individual experiences depression, right?
yeah,
Every single individual will at some point have some obsession or compulsion or need to check a doorknob, right? Or
right.
so on and so forth. It's where we hit on the spectrum on if we call it a diagnosis, right? We need these terms to be able to
Yes,
communicate, to talk
right,
about it, or to be able to make sure that there's insurance coverage
right.
for that said client to be able to get what they need. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I actually tell them, please don't become whatever diagnosis is given, but
Yeah.
let's just look at you individually. And I'm glad you say that because you're right. We can get really hung up on the terms. And it's really huge. In fact, I've actually seen that occur. My first time was actually at a group home for kids, my very
Mm,
first job. Had a little girl come in given the term ADHD, and she was just having a little trouble struggling with her homework. But I saw the way that all the different clinicians interacted with her, and by the end, she couldn't focus. She was running up and down the hallway. She was doing this and that, but it's what she was told that she had. I'm like, you guys, I worked with her for like 2 months without any of this, right? And so we can easily give people that impression if we go towards a title, but instead I believe in meeting the person where they're at, seeing where they're at, and then working, and there we can do the work. So if the struggle
absolutely.
really is, hey, I know that I am this identity or that identity, or I'm not finding love for myself because I feel like my shoulders are too broad to ever be my true feminine self, we can start to talk about how do you do the work. Absolutely, there's certain things we can do and explore, whether it's
Mm,
HRT or whether it's just
mhm,
I want to just start wearing a binder, right? Or
mhm,
something to that effect. But a
mhm,
lot of the work is actually cognitive. It's
mhm,
internal, it's in here. So we will spend a lot of time looking at, okay, let's talk about body dissatisfaction. If
mhm.
everything in my like scroll in my feed is all of this one body type, females, this and that and the other thing, because that's who I identify as, it's a lot harder to be able to step into some idealized self than if I actually start to look at what is it I'm passionate about. I want
Yeah.
to be a woman who makes a difference, so now I'm going to go volunteer. I want to be a woman who's very fashionable and enjoys fabrics or personality types. And I teach
Yeah.
people, do not just change that for themselves, but it's the way I think about others. So
Mm,
if I am constantly focused on these pictures, or if I see a person and identify like their exterior beauty,
yeah.
I will end up telling that same voice will speak to myself that way.
Mm,
But if I do the work and actually go through and start to notice the fabrics they choose, whether they have a kind smile, are they gracious and holding a door? Are they like
mhm.
walking in a way that I feel like, see how confident they are? I want that confidence, and start to step into those pieces that I really want for myself. I can find a self love that actually has nothing to do with the size of my shoulders, right?
Yeah.
And so I can actually step into that true
Mhm.
self in a different way than if I just sit there and stare at a mirror and pick and pick and pick all day. Yeah.
Right, right. And I think what we're talking about then is like, what is that idealized self that we dream of being or feel like is the most coherent sense of self? And then how is that also affected by the water that we swim in, that is, you know, this environment with Instagram and other sorts of things, a lot
Mhm.
of marketing, other sorts of things that present, you know, because even media at its highest levels is controlled by people, right? And so when we have narratives that only show one type of being, and you don't see yourself in that, the level of shame and internal, you know, negative feelings that you can feel about your own body. I mean, this is why it's important to have diversity in our, casting of shows and other stuffs to show different able-bodied people, or right, to be able to have these examples so that you can see yourself in that and not try to like fit yourself into a mold of things. You know what I mean?
But in order to do that, I have to know what that is, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing more rewarding than working with my teens who are just, well, this is what I'm supposed to look like. This is what I'm supposed to look like for a girl. This is what I'm supposed to look like for a guy, and so on and so forth. So they're making all these changes. And then they hit college years and they're doing this identity search and they realize, actually, this is what I was supposed to look like if I were me. This is what I want to be, and are able to move away from that, and you see them flourish and become really beautiful, and it makes the work amazing.
Do they start to take in like maybe different Instagram feeds and other sorts of
Oh,
things
absolutely.
too?
They start to change what that identity is and start to realize like I need to, and so part of that is their brain is still developing at the adolescent stage, right?
Yeah.
It's in the early 20s. I don't want to quote the exact statistic because I would have to check and make sure also.
Sure.
But it's in the early 20s. It's earlier for females than males. Sorry, males. It just happens to be a biological thing that it's fully developed where I can understand someone else's experience empathetically is very separate from mine. That's why as a child, it's very, very me, and I'm the object centric. Then you get to the teenage years and you see that me centric. But what they're doing is they're starting to realize I can have a separate identity. I can figure out what that is, but that feels very scary because there's so many options. I get to trial and error. But about those the years when we hit 20, it can be a lot of fun. Now that I can fully see the opposite and I can separate, I get to have some trial and error, go out and explore, and then start to identify what is right and leave behind what isn't. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the age. Like I've told you, I can work with that 60-year-old always secretly identified as female, but male who's lived their life. And now they're like, I get to go out and explore and find who that is. And it can be a really fun journey. And then once you get it all figured out, it may evolve, and that's okay too.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I'm thinking about the power of the internet in this in terms of shaping your reality. It really is pretty wild when you think about it. And before the internet age, you saw the people around you, your models of what was I mean, and the media, right? The media is always there. But now to be able to kind of construct your own feed, right, of like what you see and how that can kind of shape your reality. I mean, it does shape your reality in the same way that when you're in a community and you kind of see all the same people around you, that shapes your reality. It's kind of wild when we think about the power of things
We're
like
actually
that.
in more control of it than we think. It
Yeah,
can
same
feel very
way.
out of our control. Yeah, and I think you're talking about the most obvious level is that I change my feed if I'm
Yeah.
really into jumping out of airplanes and doing this. If I fill my feed with that instead of these versions of what the society says I should look like, then my identity is going to look different. The way that I see it, and it's really all a cognitive trick, right? It's what
Yeah.
my mind chooses to focus on.
Yeah. I think I watched a video somewhere in this internet life of someone who specifically had an eating disorder and their work with TikTok to try and change their feed, how like even after being very intentional about clicking on other videos, trying to teach the algorithm how to give them other content, they would still occasionally get this more like, eating disorder, restricting, thin sort of things that would still pop up, even though they have done really like intense work to try and change the algorithm for that. And that's kind of, it's just so fascinating to me how like, we do have to do this work now to like change these algorithms that are shaping our perspective of society.
I really like that view. Like, what about the algorithm in my mind? Yeah.
Which I think comes back to mindfulness for me is what I'm thinking about too, how like, like in many ways your reality is shaped obviously by systemic factors that are in your reality too, but within that experience, it's also shaped by like what you see and what you perceive and what you focus on, right? And how like, if that's what you focus on, then that's your reality. Everyone's doing this. This is what I should be doing. This is how I fit in. This is how I achieve connection, all these sorts of things. And yeah, you're right. It's definitely in our control, but it's fascinating to think about how we have to actually push back against something like an algorithm.
Yeah.
A reality.
I tell my clients about a theory that this is not an official theory. It's
Sure.
something that
I'm
I
here.
tell them, hey, it's real, but I made it up, sort
Yeah.
of thing. And I call it the like McDonald's theory, that like, hey, do you think the first person who ate a McDonald's cheeseburger said, this is the most delicious cheeseburger ever, this is what I'm going to go for from now on? In fact, could I not drive to the local pub and get myself a delicious cheeseburger for the exact same price as a Happy Meal? That kind of blows that little McDonald's burger out of the water. Why does everyone line up and wait for this tiny little cheeseburger, right? And the reality is they do great marketing. They tell you the same message over and over. McDonald's is fabulous. McDonald's is here. Look, here's Ronald McDonald. We give money back. Let's show some hipsters together. Let's show a happy family.
Yeah.
To the point where this means that you get to take a break. This is a treat. So much so that when you eat this disgusting little cheeseburger, you're like, this is so amazing, I get my break, and your brain believes it, and you're happy, and it releases the right things. So, but it took telling that message over and over again. We just weren't aware that the marketing was constant, right? And so the same thing is true with my clients, that if they are telling themselves the same message over and over again, and it's a negative, like, well, I'll never fit this identity, or I'm this, or I'm not worth some as much as someone else, or this or that, that's what they will believe. If I actually counteract those thoughts, right? If I use that McDonald's, if I get a message or an algorithm on my Facebook feed, and I choose, I'm cutting down the time, or I'm changing my social media to something that will be positive for me, then what you see is them being able to cognitively change what they believe. Right.
Absolutely.
So much so that if I do get one of those messages, like, yeah, whatever, that's not the good cheeseburger. The difference is I do tell my clients, we're actually selling something way more awesome because it's you than a crappy little cheeseburger.
Oh, I love that. I really love that. Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking about, I think one of my mentors had used the metaphor of like a path, when you're going out in the forest and someone has walked down this path multiple times, what ends up happening, sorry for the ecology, right? It destroys that little, I always, the ecology, it's destroying that piece of where the nature was thriving on its own, right? And so it creates this path then that is much easier to walk down every single time because it's already been walked down. And sometimes when we think about our thoughts in that way, if you're in a specific place where you think about things in a certain way, that's kind of your path that has been built. And so it just feels easy to walk down that, and to start to step outside of that path is almost like walking through the weeds at first, because it's just a different path and it feels uncomfortable. Growth is uncomfortable, right? And as you were talking about the McDonald's, I was also thinking about the research studies in the past where I don't remember, I'm sure it has like basic psychology 101, like a term to this, like the prison Stanford experience, but the ones where they would like ask people which lines were the same, I think was what it was. And they had like the first 4 people be actors, and they would all pick a line that were clearly not the same. And then they would get to the one participant in the study who didn't know that the rest of the people were actors. And then that person would end up picking that line, even though they might have like originally thought like, oh, these people are crazy, but because everyone else is doing it, I must not be understanding. I must be the one who doesn't get it. So I need to conform with the group. And like when we take that sort of lens to everything that we do, it's crazy to think about how deep that affects us with things like marketing. When you're sold, this is what everyone does, this is how you do this, And I think the other thing about this that I find really particularly fascinating is the meaning making of all of it, right? Like, what do you make out of the fact that you are a person that goes to McDonald's versus a person that goes to a 5-star restaurant? What does that say about your sense of self? Like, my existential perspective to this always comes in of like, what's the meaning making that I am a person who goes to McDonald's versus I can pay for a steak? And how does that change our sense of self-concept and identity depending on these things?
Yeah. So I love that. I love both of those studies that you're referring. That's definitely, you hit a really good point. I do think that it really does come down to what is that meaning making with things. I love what you're saying about the second one, especially. I think as we do that, I think that's where you have that choice where do I just, and it's okay if I actually find my true self is actually comfortable in this group because they share my values and this is what's right for
Yeah,
me, awesome. But if
absolutely.
it's actually not, how do I make sure I don't sell into that meaning as opposed to figuring out what mine is? And we're coming to the day, like I said, there wasn't clipboards with rainbows and different things before, but now
Yeah.
we're coming to the day where it's okay. You can be who you want to be. And it's almost fun and cool to be your own individual self, no matter what that is, as opposed to, hey, we've got to fit in a box and
Yeah. You
be
know,
a 1950s Stepford wife.
yeah,
So, yeah.
absolutely. You know, it's cool as I stepped into Target the other day, and they actually had this design set up for all the holiday bags that you were able to buy, and they set up this piece where it had a little bit of description from all the different artists that created the bags, and even on that description it was like da 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 is a non-binary artist who represents people of color, da 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 is a queer artist, blah blah blah, and I was just like, you know what, if this is the space we're getting to where capitalism is learning to like
Hmm.
profit off of our individuality, but do it in
Hmm.
a way that increases awareness about different ways of existing in this world, I'm all for that. You know what I mean? Like, if that means that someone who's never heard the word non binary before steps into Target and learns about it from that, that's great. I
Yeah.
obviously I think it's also wrong to profit off of people's identities in that way. So I think it's like yes and, but like,
Yeah, I'm glad you.
man,
I kind of battle with that too sometimes,
ugh,
especially when you see it's almost becoming commercialized, and it's like, wait, becoming your true self should not be commercialized. But on the other hand, I mean, if you look at other areas, it's been done for many, many years. It just happens to be they're finally adopting and accepting this as a norm. Like you can be your true self, and sometimes that does mean that I fit in queer, LGBTQ, trans,
mhm.
polyamorous, so on and so forth.
Mhm,
So yeah.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it's one of those ones that I tried to hold the nuance for of like, yes, this is bad because we're profiting off of that, and like also like I'm happy if this is where capitalism is trending. Do you know what I mean? Towards
Yeah.
listening to the people and honoring that. Like talk about collective power in that and maybe being able to shape a different direction where maybe eventually capitalistic people will have to actually listen to the desires of the people and be more reflective of that than like this top down sort of problematic nature
That's
of
where the education,
exploitation.
because the first step is we have to get people talking, right?
Yeah.
So what you're talking about, and it's like anything that will get it out there and normalize, like, hey, this is something that like we need to accept. You can't just call people she and he. If they want to be called they, you need to honor and respect this, right? And
Hmm.
if we can normalize that, then
Oh
the
yeah.
education piece comes. Now
Yeah.
that you know that this is a thing, that's where we have to educate. Because if your only message is that like, hey, Target sells these rainbow handbags and that's what this means, you either like fit that norm or you don't, that's actually not what it's about, right?
Right.
It's actually about understanding
Yep.
what that means, that education piece, that hey, this whole rainbow was created after they realized that there's a concern that when you look at the different communities, that lesbians and gays did not necessarily commune, or even if they
Yeah.
did commune, they were not accepting of trans, so on and
Yep.
so forth,
Yep.
right?
Or
But what this
bisexuals.
rainbow means, it was the beginning of putting, I mean, we started with a very small acronym and now we have a plus at the end of it, of
Right.
LGBTQIA plus,
Yes.
because it just keeps growing. And the
Yeah.
whole idea is what we're trying to do is umbrella and bring everyone
Hmm.
together and let there be equal acceptance for all and understanding, instead of like, well, if you're within this group, but we'll oppress if you're trans or whatever that thing is. So it's actually educating them. This is what that rainbow means,
Yeah.
not just, hey, you're a cool teen because you are openly queer and bought a rainbow purse, right? But instead
Hmm.
you need to understand the education piece. Then with the education piece, we can start to direct with more people understand, but this is not just to this. I mean, if you look at any battle of oppression, first people need to know that it's even a problem with it, bring
Right.
awareness, then we need to educate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which makes me ask the question, is that setup of Target's display in rural Iowa, right? Like, is that there or is it just in Chicago because that speaks to a different demographic of the type of people that are in this city?
I'll tell you what, let's do a road trip. I'll jump in the car
Yeah.
with you. Let's go. Let's go find out.
I know, because I'm
If
like,
not, I'm going to bring one and leave it there.
I know, because
Yeah.
you know it's probably not. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
That's definitely, yeah. Yeah, that's
which
marketing, Joe, too. If you go to Paris, you can get a veggie burger on the menu for McDonald's, but if you come here, you'll never see it. It's marketing to the demographic. So it is unfortunate when it comes to, hey, we're trying to educate and create a general consensus that all are welcome and all are accepted, and
yeah,
understanding what that means. So
yeah.
that way I'm not causing microaggressions across.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so this is where I've been feeling about this and thinking, so hear me out here of this, like that person who's in rural Iowa that's not getting that experience of the target setup, that's not their fault. None of this is their fault. I understand that they need to be responsible for your level of existence within these structures and within the patriarchy, and doing the constant work to be reflecting on that and growing in that and doing that. Like, this is no way negating the level of responsibility we all have in the system to be reflecting on the ways that we're enacting microaggressions and other sorts of things. And also at the same time, it is not their fault. None of this is any of our faults. This is the results of years of systemic oppression that have created this system where this is where we live and what we think connection can be and should be, and the amount of space we're able to hold for other people. Like,
Mhm.
I just want to be able to hold that nuance of not hating that person who doesn't understand, because this is not their fault. In the same way that generational trauma is not the person's fault at the end of it. We are all in a system of generational trauma around oppression and white supremacy and colonialism and all these things, right? It's like, again, not to negate any of our responsibility to do the work in that, but also not to look at these people and be like, what the fuck is wrong with them? The system is wrong with them. The system.
Well, change takes time
Yeah.
too. I'll tell you, when I did a bunch of work with human trafficking, and so a lot of people will start off thinking, I'm going to go and I'm going to help do this and that, and it's going to make this big change, but they don't realize that actually takes years and years of
Yeah.
change. The example that was given to me by the missionaries who had literally been in Indonesia for years trying to work with an organization, an agency, literally just to build the relationship. We're not actually looking or making change yet. We have to build the relationship, or they're not even going to build into the change. So when you go there as a missionary being like, I'm going to go and change everything, that's not how it works. It actually takes generations of kind of showing, hey, this is okay. There was a really great example that they gave us. They said, hey, look, when you look at chapels and these
Mhm.
huge paintings,
Mhm.
and then when you travel, they happened over generations. It wasn't the first painter. They were actually the great great grandfather of the person who completed that ceiling, right? They never got to see that end. And
Yeah.
we actually have to look at like when we're talking about great systemic change, especially around oppression, and
Yeah.
realize that this is something that we all need to be active in, but we also need to accept that I may not be painting that final flower on the ceiling of this chapel, that it takes a lot of time, especially if something has been so ingrained into the minds or into society. So, yeah.
Yeah, those are the moments where I feel kind of powerless in this profession and seeing that and feeling that. So I appreciate that reframe, and my mentors have been trying to give me that too, of like of planting seeds and the time that it takes for things to grow in nature, and in the same way for like larger social movements. That I think it's also it's like very demoralizing and feels very powerless when you look at how big this is and how little we can do to change it. And I mean, I believe in the ripples. I believe in the conversations that we have in spaces like this and being able to share them. It's just like, it doesn't feel like enough. And then being able to balance that between like your own experience of trying to enjoy this life and not spend your whole life trying to like fix this problem that could be it's not could be is generational project through all of humanity to deconstruct these, right? And like how do you be an advocate for that and also have a personal space that allows yourself to enjoy this life? I'm that's where I'm at.
I love that. That's two different things. So I'm going to hit the first one first.
Hit me, yeah.
Absolutely. So is the second person who painted that ceiling, did they have no impact or no power in the mural on that ceiling?
Yeah, it's important. Yeah.
Right. So that last person won't get to see and stand in a world where many people just come in to see a finished ceiling.
Yeah.
Yeah. their great great grandfather didn't spend the time, even though when they ended, all it was the outline sketch, right? And so you have to, that's where it's tricky, right? We have to trust the process.
Right.
Social workers are taught it at an early age, and I get that doesn't come out because I might see, like at Alexian Brothers, it was a crisis center, right? Like you go in there for while you're in crisis, and then you go to the outpatient client. Or I may see a client who gets so far, and then they're going to need to go to 2 more therapists before they're finally done with battling anger, right? And I actually have to trust the process. That some of the work that we have, even if they're not ready for it, will kick it or click in 2 years when they are ready for it, sort of thing. Or I have to trust the process, that I was a piece of that person's walk as they went from consistently struggling with suicidal thoughts to actually self-love, right? Even though I saw them at that one moment in time. And so I think we get a step ahead with that battle. But I want you to know that, like, that each person they ran into or interacted with was just as important a piece of that wall. The work that you're doing is just so important. It's just as important, even if you don't get to sit there and see that final product. So that would be my answer to you, is you are doing it. You just don't get that immediate, like, and here's the finished product. So, I mean, we've definitely, certain people, obviously, when gay marriage became legal in certain states and stuff like that, so many people actually got to see the fruits of that. But there's many people who actually laid the groundwork who are not alive and did not get to see that. And so did they not matter? We wouldn't have had that day had they not done the work. So your work matters. It does. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think, it's hard to see that, I guess. And speaking, this is my first year doing therapy and being able to work with clients directly in that sort of way. And I think it's hard to remember that, because it's such an interesting profession to not, you might not see all the results of the relationship that you had with that person or how you affected them or years down the line. And so to, like, understand change and growth and expansion in that sort of way, kind of like nature of, planting a seed that turns into a sequoia over decades and years, and, like, being able to have that patience with that and see that, I think is an interesting space to be stepping into.
Yeah. You will get the wins too. You might realize 2 years later when you're working with a client, oh my gosh, when you did come to me, you really struggled with X, and now I'm seeing you really kind of have this pattern down that's includes so much more self-love or more confidence in social situations or whatever the thing is that they're working on, and realizing they've got it at maintenance stage, right? So you will get some of those wins as
Absolutely.
well. But when you talked about the work-life balance, I do want to make sure I didn't,
hit me.
You got 2 pieces there that
hit me
too. I can give my whole life to missions and do all of this work, but I actually have to have that balance, because it's the whole oxygen and mask thing, right? And the airplane, that if I don't actually take care of myself and I hit burnout, I can't provide that to others. And I tell that to my clients all the time too. So it's not just a social work issue, but it's all of us. Anyone who's out there being an activist, anyone who's out there trying to make change, anyone who's out there trying to take care of a sick mother, that we actually, that balance is healthy. You can't give, my guess is that guy who was painting the ceiling, he clocked out for the day and he went and he did things that he was passionate about in his life that was additional too. So that way it was okay that maybe I won't be here when the ceiling finishes, but
absolutely,
it was a piece of my life, not the whole thing.
Absolutely. Having that, I think that always comes back to the understanding of utilitarianism. I remember studying that when I was minored in philosophy in my undergrad, and, like, this concept of, the idea, I don't know, do you know a lot about utilitarianism, like that philosophical idea?
I know some, yes.
Okay.
It's not necessarily the direction that I went into in study, but I know.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it in a long time, but from what I remember, it was like the idea of, ethically, your decision is to weigh the pros and cons, right? And, like, if the pros outweigh in terms of goodness to the world, the cons, then you go with that decision, which like taken at its full context would always mean taking off your mask on the plane, because you could help other people with all of that, and so it adds to more goodness in the world in that way, but would completely deteriorate your own existence, right? Like I could always be giving my money away to other people so they eat, so much so that I stop eating myself, and like trying to find that balance then between, like, it's not always weighing the good versus the bad outcomes, but rather more so, like you said, the plane on the mask. You have to put on your mask first before you can help others. I think what I struggle with is that like I'm part of the problem, right? Like I'm a white cisgendered, granted queer, kinky, polyamorous person, but like I am fully a part of the problem. And so it's like that question then of like, how do you find balance between knowing that and wanting to do that work, and also needing to like just go relax outside under the sun.
Yeah, on that balance. Well, I think you actually said it in that sentence. I'm this, but I'm also this, right?
Yeah.
I don't give up, because you're actually acting as an example, right? Like, so even when I look at a client, I can't look at them and say, hey, you have to find work-life balance. You have to do this and that, and then not do it for myself.
Yeah.
But also, I need to stay healthy. I need to do these pieces to be able to come back, and I can't preach it if I don't live it.
Right.
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 And some of that is, hey, I identify as openly queer. I identify as kinky. I identify as whatever you just like, whatever that goes. And I'm going to actually actively go through that search. And what you're actually doing is you're bringing back a stronger individual, because you're not saying, okay, let me sit with you and talk to you about what I read in this textbook. The textbook says you should have counter thoughts, right? The textbook says that you should have some anxiety here, but eventually go to acceptance, right? Like none of those things. I actually went and I lived and I actually let myself evolve, and I'm happy with those pieces so that I can bring back someone who's whole, even if in our profession we may not share every piece of that walk. That battle is real. And if I'm feeling not my full self inside, but I'm sitting down with another person, is it really a symbiotic relationship? I need to be doing the work too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that's resonating. And I think for me and my what I'm passionate about studying with sex and relationships, I've been trying to get into the space of what is pleasure? Like what is pleasure in our sex lives and relationships? Because that's just an area of discourse that isn't talked about for a lot of different reasons, including shame and taboos and yada, yada, yada. So that's my whole space too of it, where then like, what does it look like to live a pleasurable life? And then I always come back to, well, that's a privilege that you get to have that, and it's like, woof. So then it's like, I've been just sitting with that a lot, I think. And I really appreciate what you're saying of that, like you have to live the walk too, and be able to speak from your own lived experience of that. And then be able, it's like feeding yourself a nutritious meal before you go run a marathon. You know what I mean? Like you can't expect to just like not give yourself the nourishment that you need to be able to go out there and do that work. But the navigation of that. And then I think when you start to think about like how much you charge for clients and navigating that and all of these pieces in this capitalistic game, I'm just so like, how do I not enact more harm by being a psychologist in this game? I'm just like,
Well, when you're talking about pleasure, especially when you're talking about sexual pleasure, you might actually enjoy, I don't know, how familiar are you with sensei therapy?
I have the book quite literally.
Okay, yes.
This computer right here.
I brought it up because you mentioned mindfulness before, and it's one of the methods that I actually use with couples or an individual who might come to me and say, hey, I want to understand myself more sexually, or I need to learn how to let go. I'm carrying so much of that anxiety. And so it's literally going into and utilizing those 5 senses and getting to know the self, changing the association that I may have. Maybe I didn't like, whether I didn't want someone to touch my belly because I don't like it, or because I had gas one day. If I continue to let them because they're my partner, eventually I can't hold their hand, which makes no sense at all, right? I can't let them hold my hand because I allowed that negative association to happen enough times that we have to remove that, and we use the 5 senses to bring it back to create a new association and new environment, right? But the same thing is true with your practice. If I am sitting here working with somebody and I'm talking to them about self-love, I'm talking to them about mindfulness, or I'm talking to them about what it might feel like and how difficult it is to go to school, and tell everyone that I'm openly changing my name from Tim to Sally, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever those things are. But then I'm actually out. I'm not actually doing it for myself. I can create negative associations as a therapist because I'm not living, I'm not doing those things. I'm coming in, I'm giving it to them. But if I eventually, because I let my partner touch my belly when I was not feeling right, now can't hold their hand anymore. The same thing can happen with social work. You've got to, part of what you're doing is you're actually helping your clients by going and actually taking care of yourself, living your life, figuring out what your identity is, making sure you take that true self, going out and dancing or whatever it is, if your thing is painting, and living that, because then when you come back, you're speaking from something that you have positive association, you're speaking from passion. It's funny because you had started, I think when we talked about this, you're like, what are you passionate about? And I'm like, you have to come from that place of passion. And if you let that die because you're like, I'm going to give everything to the cause to change it, you're actually like impeding the process, right? I can bring that passion because I continue to go back, take care of myself, and spark that passion, find my true self, and then put the energy into, there will always be someone who's interested in a different part of the fight than you. Right. So if my interest is actually sitting with the clients, awesome. But if I have zero passion for that and I went and did that, the practice wouldn't be good, right? Maybe I'm more passionate about going to lobby to the state to make change, to change laws so that way that everyone has the right to change the name on their passport to whatever gender and name that they choose, right? No matter what, it's okay. There will be someone who will do the other piece of the fight. Figure out your passion. You can't do that if you don't self-care. You don't go and you go find out who you are as an individual, kinky, openly poly person, then you're missing a piece, right? And your clients will know the difference. They will sense that. It's the difference between reading a textbook and sitting and saying, all right, let's do this thing. Let's talk about it.
So you're saying I need to have more kinky sex. Yes.
You can blame me for that. I hope you do. I hope later you say, you know what, I talked to Karla and she told me to.
It's part of my research, okay? No, but it's so true though, and I really appreciate you saying that of these pieces, and I think this is applicable to anybody, not just therapists, right? In terms of like people who are socially minded and trying to be activists in the space of like, how do we balance the time between growing on how we are, or reflecting and learning how we are the problem, and also finding that thing that lights you up and brings you joy, and spending time and the pleasure of that. I watched one video from the person who wrote Trauma Stewardship. Have you read that book?
I haven't. I've heard of it though. I'm gonna write it down to remember.
It's great. Yeah, one of those like nice reminders in this of for anyone who's in a helping profession of how to take care of yourself and have mindfulness in that. And she had done a TED Talk, and specifically what she said in this world that we need is people who are present and on fire, because that's literally what we need, is more people who are coming to this with that thing that lights them up, that is their area of the fight of all of this, right? And if we're all doing our work in that, of finding that thing that does that for you, we'll have a radically different society. So it's not that we have to do all of it, but rather finding that thing that does it for you, that gives you that zest, that vitality to go out and do that work on the scales that you can, and affect with ripples out through that.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love how you worded that. Exactly. You have to have that internal fire. And how can you have that if you're not actually allowing that? You're like, nope, I don't have the time. I have to be just in the mission, right? It's funny. I'm going to give you even more of an okay to go have kinky sex, right?
Give it to me right now, please.
Here's what I'm going to say. Let's say that you are a kinkster. And for you, one of the ways that you can heal that trauma is to be able to live through that piece where you get to be in control now. Maybe your control was taken away at some point in your life in a traumatic way. I can now go be dominant in this room, and I can take control, and I can find that piece of myself. And through that work of like having these kinky scenes, I've really learned to truly love myself and grasp that side and say, I can be this dominant self. Guess what? Now I'm going to go sit and I'm going to go work with other people who are trying to figure out their trauma through that. I mean, it's like a totally different world than saying, hey, I keep going back to the textbook, but I read that, yeah, through dominance, you'll find this, but instead being able to say, absolutely, I'm passionate about you finding the way, even if they don't choose kink, right? But if they choose a different way, I'm passionate about you finding the way that you can find your own internal healing through the trauma you experience. Even if for you, it's playing the drums, right? Not that kinky scene, but at the end of the day, I can have that passion different because I went and lived that for myself, and I can stand behind it in a way that isn't just the textbook says. So I'm giving you more permission to go have that kinky sex if you want to.
Yeah, and I'll take that space to even double up the ante here in this poker game and say that that has been my journey as a sexual assault survivor, right? To have that space where I have engaged in sexual dynamics with BDSM, and even the power that has been a part of the process of being a bottom and a sub, in that I've been able to communicate my boundaries clearly and have them heard and know that they would be heard in a way that was not my experience during my assault, right? And so to have that space where you can play with those dynamics and to be able to do it in such a safe way with so much communication and intimacy in that has been utterly profound. That like, this is my plan to start like write my first book on healing through kink. And because I think it has been a story that when I've spoken to other people in the community who have had similar experiences of transforming and coming into different aspects of their identity, kind of like we were talking about, and seeing yourself in a different way, that has been my journey. And so it is something that I directly want to research and study. So you put it out there, and I was like,
you're gonna have a lot of fun on that journey. You're gonna meet a lot of really wonderful people along the way too. But I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah, that's exactly it. And this is why you need to do the for yourself and what you're passionate. Absolutely.
Yes. And
I
so
support that journey.
thank you. I'll send that to my mom. Actually, a therapist mom said it's okay.
As long as it's what's right for you and what you're passionate about.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah. You also have the right to try it out, and it's not the right one thing, and that's okay. Then we'll try something else. I spend a lot of time talking to my clients about how, hey, life is actually just all trial and error. Right?
I love that.
Like,
some more. Yeah.
Well, what if I do this thing and then it's the wrong thing and then I'm stuck in it forever? And I go, oh yes, if you try that, you're stuck in that forever. And I just smile, and they look back at me and they're like, okay, maybe just a little dramatic. And I'm like, all right then, right? But there's one way, as long as we're making sure we're reducing harm during the process, like you are when you're saying, hey, I want to make sure in this scene that at the end of the day that I get to fully negotiate and that I'm heard and I'm respected, even though I'm choosing to sit as a bottom. And I want to live that enough times that that one experience I had has a lot less power because I've had this many positive ones, right? Through that, it's amazing.
Yeah. I love that too, of like, you kind of don't know until you try in some ways, right? It's hard to say you don't like something until you know. And once you do, you have the beautiful awareness of knowing now. That's the gift of this uncertainty of like, should I figure this out? I don't know if I'll like it forever. It's like you're taking a sip of the drink. That does not mean you have to drink. And I stole this from some podcast guest that came on and told me, I think that their dad gave them this analogy, of like, you're paying for the beer and you take a sip of it. If you don't like it, you don't have to drink the whole beer. You paid to try it, and now you know, right? And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think I hear a lot in the space of people saying, you know, take what resonates with you and leave the rest,
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. It makes me think of this. I'm just like, yes, absolutely. Yes. It makes me think of this when we work with domestic violence. I'd actually done my, one of my internships for my master's at Loyola at the Family Rescue, which is we worked at District 3 police station and went to the courthouses and he kind of stood with people while they sat and stood to get an order of protection against the aggressor. And one of the things that we would talk about, because I spent many times sitting on the phone where you're literally hearing the aggressor in the background and so on and so forth, but it's not my choice, it's theirs. They have the right to choose if they wanted me to help them go to a shelter or to get somewhere, but they also have the right to change their mind as many times as they want. But yet I'm sitting with somebody who's struggling with that perfectionism piece. But what if I do this and then I end up this way? And I'm like, wait, why don't you get the right to change your mind? Right? Like, and I think that we should always work on, like, I can trial and error. I also have the right to change my mind. I can do this as many times as I want, but at the end of the day, if it's not what's serving me, I also have the right to change that thing. And I think we get stuck in these boxes sometimes. So yes, I agree. I agree so much. I like that beer analogy. That's a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking about the ways that psychology even does that sometimes, right? So I think that's why I like more of a feminist theoretical perspective to psychology, of avoiding those power over dynamics of presuming where someone should go, how they should do this in this world. Like, that's enacting harm on its own way to come to that person and be like, you shouldn't be doing this. This is how you should live your life, A, B, C, D, E, F, J, right? Like, it's just, we have to be careful with that, of like enacting, expectations for someone's unfolding journey that may take a very different direction in this existential void than anything I presume to be health, right? Like, that's dismantle the field of psychology one day at a day, one step at a day, right?
Yeah. I will tell you though, as much as I see society do it, as much as I see different pieces, the number one place that I should be in this box, it should be this way, is actually the individual. We create these narratives for ourselves. So through that, we can also free ourselves, where it's a little harder for me to free if it's society telling me I should be this instead of that. But we actually create that for ourselves. And then I see so many clients who finally decide, you know what, let me do this journey, let me find out who I am, and let me live my true authentic self, and then sit and process shocked, like, I really thought the world would never accept this. I really thought that was XYZ, but now I'm realizing they still, like, actually, I'm surrounded by people I really love and love me now. I'm realizing I held myself back, like it was me. And so through that work, we can also do amazing things. So,
absolutely. Because at the end of the day, we all want connection. We all want connection and community and love. And so there will become times where there's aspects of yourself, because of whatever reason, that might threaten that connection, right? For me, it was coming out as queer to my Mormon mom, right? Like, not being able to say that because what is that going to do? Or telling her I had an abortion, right? All these little pieces that are so scary. And so, like, in some ways, that is me holding that back. Or we could say that is my mom that's causing me to hold it back. Or we could say that is the society that maybe taught my mom that queers were sinful, right? Like, all of that sort of stuff. So it's like such a yes and for me, of like, yes, it is me and it is the system, and like being able then to
agree
like
with that.
and then being able to decide that I have the power, though, always, like you're saying, to choose what I bring out. I cannot control how that person's going to respond.
Exactly.
And that's the tricky piece of doing this all with safety, right? Like, if I come out as this, will I get shut off and lose financial security? Will all these things happen? And the answer is yeah, maybe, right? So it's like we always have that power, in doing that with safety and boundaries and the whole thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a balancing act that they're figuring out what's truly me. You might find, I'm gonna have to send you a book list later. There's a book, I'm trying to remember the author offhand, but it was actually written quite a while ago, but it's some of the concepts are dated, but some are not. And it's about passing in our society. And
Wow.
talking about passing. And what's great about his approach is it as passing isn't necessarily always a bad thing, right? If it can be good, it can be bad. It's each person's journey to decide to what extent do I need to do that or want to do that, or to what point is it actually healthy for me to burn all those bridges down and say, no, this is truly authentically me, or can I compartmentalize? And why am I any less authentic if I chose that's what's right for me to compartmentalize and have, I'm passing at work, but I'm this when I'm out with my friends or something to that effect. So
Yes.
yeah, and the jury is still out. And I really believe it's each person figuring out the journey individually for themselves. Absolutely. And then the education to the world and coming to acceptance. But you're right, at the time, that doesn't mean it's all fixed tomorrow.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And doing the self-care in between until we get to that world that we dream of where this is no longer the reality for all of us. Yeah. I want to hold a little bit of space towards the end in case there was something lingering for you that maybe we didn't get to as we come to the close of our time. I always like to hold a little bit of space towards the end.
No, I don't necessarily have anything specific. I know we talked a little bit about individual work, eating disorder, but I think we talked more about like the true authentic self, you know, that your group works a lot, or your podcast has a lot about polyamory. That's an amazing, but at the end of the day, that's identity work too, because every polyamorous couple or individual is their own unique thing. Once again, it's not who cares what the Joneses are doing next door, right? Like it's finding that what's true and right for me and doing that individual work. I guess if I said one thing to your listeners, I'd be like, go out there and enjoy that journey, and then once you figure it out and you evolve again, enjoy it all over again. And let that be.
Yes, there's no one way to be in connection with other people. There's multitudes of ways to be in connection that are going to feel good depending on your experience and your value system and your world. And so, there's not just one way to do this. And I always appreciate the discussions of polyamory as another world to do that. And I think even creating more space to do any sort of relational dynamic that ends up bringing you joy. I am all for that. Yeah. Well, then, as we close our time, I have one question that I ask everyone on the podcast.
Okay.
Yeah. And that question is, what is one thing that you wish other people knew was more normal?
That's a good question. I think that it's actually doesn't even hit like any of the topics we've talked about, LGBTQ, kink, any of that stuff.
I love that.
Disorder. It's every single person that comes to me at some point will process and say, I don't do this. Like, I know everybody else has this except for me, or like, why does everyone have it more together? Or why does everybody else have sex all figured out and I don't? And like, my biggest secret is that they don't. Like, it's forever evolving. And actually, it's what makes you normal is that we go through all kinds of anxieties, excitements, passion, like trauma, difficult times, and just, you're not alone. I think that would be my biggest thing, is that I haven't met one individual in the many years I've been doing this that's exactly like another individual. Every single person is so different, and they all go through this exact same thing. So just do you, and stop worrying about what everyone else is doing and figure out what's right for you, I think would be my message to send to the world as I'm sitting here preaching individuality, I think. So,
Yes. And what a exciting choose your own adventure. There might be some scary parts of that journey. If I know anything about growth and expansion, it's been scary and really uncomfortable, but wow, what an adventure to unfold for yourself when you think about it in that way.
Yeah, it's cool. It's really cool.
Well, this has been so lovely. I really appreciate you bringing in all of your clinical expertise and your perspective, and also giving me a lot of grounding in my own experience of navigating this. That was really profound for me to hear, and something that I'll definitely be taking away. So thank you for that.
Well, I want to thank you for your time too. It's been amazing to get to spend this time with you, and I can't wait for our road trip.
Yes. Let's go to Target.
Let's do it.
If you enjoyed today's episode, then leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you're a part of the anarchist community, then follow us on Instagram or nominate a guest for the show by sending in a letter to modernanarchypodcast@gmail.com. Otherwise, I'll see you next week.